Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's first edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. On the show tonight,
it's no longer a question as to whether we need it. It's a question of when, how, and how creative can we be, and where can we get the money from.
An expert panel report recommends that South Africa continues with the payment of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant until a basic income support grant is in place. We speak to the authors of the report as well as those who will have to implement the recommendations.
We are pleased with our modest impact thus far.
Public Protector Busiwe Mkhwebane reflects on the year that was for her and her office. As confusion reigns over the accuracy of COVID-19 numbers, President Cyril Ramaphosa expresses regret at this behavior after testing positive. All of that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Public Protector Advocate Busiwe Mkhwebane is pleased with the work her office has done in 2021. In this calendar year, the office issued 94 reports dealing with a wide range of issues from service delivery to good governance matters, procurement of services, and appointments. Today, the office held its 10th media briefing for the year, where the Public Protector released 8 reports. She joins us now for some reflections on the year that was. Good evening, Advocate. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to the SABC listeners. Thank you so much for inviting us to your show.
It's a pleasure indeed. Thank you for agreeing to come through. Let me start here, perhaps on a lighter note. I see pictures of you displaying the Jacob Zuma book all over social media. What was the occasion?
There's no occasion, Vuyo. I bought the books and to read as well, to also give the gifts to my family and friends, for them to hear the story from the horse's mouth. So it's purely that. Unfortunately, yes, it was posted by the person who delivered the book for me. So, yeah.
You're not endorsing the book, right? Necessarily.
Then?
You're not endorsing the book?
Not really. I mean, I'm going to read the book to hear the side of the story of the former president. And I must indicate that I've started reading the book, and the book has a lot of the State of the Nation addresses since 2009, the government programs, what was implemented. So that is the information which is public knowledge and public information. So I wanted to hear the other side of the story, because we've heard a lot in the media about what was said, and then now the person who has been reported about is also writing their side of the story.
You don't think people may read other things you perhaps didn't mean into it?
You know, it's so unfortunate in South Africa that, I mean, there's a lot of books which are published. They are sold all over the bookstores. And I think we should encourage South Africans to be a reading nation. So I wonder, why is it a problem to read this book? Because there's several books which one has read, just to keep abreast of what is happening around one. So I don't think it's an issue for one to buy the book and read for themselves, especially Africans, we should be encouraged to write our own story instead of allowing other people to tell our story.
It's been an eventful year. I don't know how, you would describe it. Early in the year, your mom passed away. May her soul rest in peace. That happening while you were facing the pending inquiry into fitness, your fitness to hold office. You also had to face perjury charges. Then there was a constitutional court ruling that you overstepped your powers by investigating the CR17 campaign for the ANC presidency. And in the same year, you were nominated for the post of Chief Justice. That's a lot, in just 1 year.
That's a lot indeed, Vuyo. It's been a very hectic and a year which was filled with a lot of trials and tribulations. But I thank God that we are in the last month of the year. I also unfortunately lost my sister last month. So it's been hectic indeed, but with God on my side, and I'm still standing, and it's by His strength actually that I'm still standing. And I think the most important thing is also putting the South Africans first in whatever I do with the public protector team.
Let us start with the nomination for the post of Chief Justice. You said when you got an opportunity to talk about it that your focus is in finishing off your term. You left with what? Just over 2 years, and that's your focus at the moment. Some people would say, well, position of Chief Justice of the country versus the remainder of your years as public protector. One would have thought you'd choose differently.
Being a public protector, the public protector is provided for in the Constitution. The public protector who is defending the public when the same constitutional court through Justice Mogoeng, Chief Justice Mogoeng said, is like you protecting the public, which is like a biblical David facing the Goliath, which is the state. One thing about this office is that you reach out to the poor, the marginalized, people who are not having any resources to take the powerful state to court. Our services are free. And I think here I see a lot of impact which one is having on the public than, the Chief Justice, which is also very critical. But then I think, remember, they wouldn't even do an own initiative investigation. They wouldn't even do an alternative dispute resolution. They are there as the Constitutional Court awaiting litigants to bring matters to them. And most of the time, those litigants are well-resourced, whereas the work of the public protector is, any person can complain, it is free. Therefore, I think for me, this speaks a lot to what I believe in. And my commitment when I started as the public protector, that I'm here to serve. And indeed, serving and seeing the fruits of our serving as the public protector, it's worth much for me.
Well, interestingly, now that you've mentioned, former Chief Justice Mogoeng, after declining nomination for the position of Chief Justice, you congratulated the former Chief Justice. And I want to quote a line from what you said. You congratulated him for, and I quote, having exercised his powers and performed his functions with utmost distinction and conviction, and for never allowing popular narratives to sway him, close quotes. That was a very strong, and some would say loaded statement.
Indeed, it is loaded in the sense that I've seen the work of the Chief Justice, especially how he pronounced on the work of the Public Protector. Taking, for instance, the minority judgment which he penned out in the matter of, in the CX, or the so-called CX matter, where you would see that the Chief Justice took his time to go through our pleadings to understand each and every reasoning which we have put in those documents. And you could see that he even went through the record which we have attached, explaining ourselves. So I think the objectivity which I've seen there, for me, it showed that this is the kind of judges who would, as a country, would say, our democracy is safe in their hands, because they look out for righteousness and justice. And whatever they decide on facts. They don't listen to what is being told in the media or the narration out there, but they focus on the evidence which is before them. So I said that based on that. And besides, there's several of the judgments where he penned out the minority judgment, and indeed his reasoning also, he applied his mind. He made sure that he took into consideration all the facts. He made sure that he applies the law to the T.
Do you believe that there is a quote-unquote popular narrative out there about you that has nothing to do with who you are and how you do your work? In other words, that is not backed by evidence from what we've seen, from what we've read, from the reports that you've written?
Yes, Vuyo, there is indeed, because I've been accused of favoring certain factions within the ANC. That has been said a lot, and I think there's comments that this Public Protector is favoring certain individuals, and which is wrong, because our work speaks for itself. If you can check the reports which we've issued as an institution, you would see that our reports, we don't care who has been complained against. We just focus on the complaint before us. We investigate and acquire our own evidence. Then we make findings out of that as well, supported by the legal framework which is there. So I think the issue is, unfortunately, you would find the media with their headlines pushing their own narration. A lot of the mainstream media is in the business of profit. So whatever to them sells, or when they write about an individual and people are interested, and they repeat what is not correct over and over and over, because I've seen that happening in a number of times.
As far as you are concerned, you're not, according to one Fikile Mbalula, a hired gun. And as far as you are concerned, you do your job, and to quote you from what you said about Mukweng, you're doing your job with utmost distinction and conviction.
Definitely, Vuyo, and I must indicate that, the work of the Public Protector, I have delegated a lot of my powers to the investigation team, and they are the ones who are conducting the investigations. When the complaint is lodged, allocated to them, conduct the investigation, acquire all evidence independently. And when the report is at the preliminary stage, where we are picking up that there are findings against individuals, then it's brought to my attention, and that must be supported by the evidence and the legal prescripts. So doing my work with my team, we are focusing on, what is fair, what is before us, in compliance with the relevant legal framework. So I think that's a challenge where you'd find members of the executive who take an oath of office to respect and abide by the Constitution, but go ahead and then insult the public protector, which is also actually a crime or a criminal offense in terms of the Public Protector Act. But unfortunately, on that one as well, we opened a criminal case, and the Director of Public Prosecution decided not to prosecute. So we are still following up on that and seeing how we can then litigate on the matter, because I think he has an obligation in terms of the Constitution to respect the Constitution.
But how do you feel about, having to face, you yourself having to face perjury charges? How do you feel about the fact that, which was a very high profile, big case, the Constitutional Court ruling that you overstepped your powers by investigating the CR17 campaign?
The perjury charge, remember, it's not only the perjury charge. Remember, I also paid personal costs for you. The same Constitutional Court through Justice Kambembe and Theron and others decided that I should pay personal cost whilst doing my responsibility as the public protector. In addition, that perjury case is deriving from that particular case, and the complainant is Advocate Hoffman. So I think still trusting in the independence of the judiciary, still trusting that the very same matter is before the Magistrates Court in Pretoria Regional Court, and I hope the representation we've made to the National Director of Public Prosecution, she will consider it positively. So we will try our level best, or I will try my level best, that I cooperate with any institution which is investigating the matter. So it's part of the process. And I must indicate that the Constitutional Court judgment, we've learned from that judgment. We are implementing a lot of findings which were made, not only the Constitutional Court, but even from lower courts. Because remember, as an institution, my powers are not unfettered. I also account to the National Assembly, but as well, if anyone is not happy with the findings of the Public Protector, this is a constitutional democracy. They can take the findings to court for review. Therefore, on the Constitutional Court judgment, we applied for a rescission of certain provisions, because what we relied on is the executive members' ethics code, which was also relied on in the Nkandla judgment.
Just very quickly, what in particular did you learn from this case?
The remedial action, because normally what we used to do, the odi alteram partem rule, or giving the other side an opportunity to give us their side of the story, we used to give them what we call a Section 7, subsection 9 notice. In terms of that provision, it says you give the implicated party, after investigating, having the evidence before you, then you say to this other party, we have the following evidence, we have the findings against you. Can you then give us your side of the story? But now the Constitutional Court said, especially in that Busasa matter, you need to go further and even indicate what remedy are you going to be giving to that, or are you going to come up with. So that's what we have learned, and indeed we are now issuing what we call Section 79 notices with remedial action included, so that the party can see how we are going to correct whatever findings which we came up with. So that's what we are doing currently.
And how do you feel about the pending inquiry into your fitness to hold office?
That matter is before court, so the judgment was reserved, and we will hear what the outcome is. But I indicated that the work will continue. We're continuing to protect the public. Hence, we're continuing to issue reports with findings. And before issuing those reports, engage the state institutions, even other members of the executive. Some of them even agree upfront. I indicated that with the Ngogo matter which was lodged against the National Department of Health, where the minister outrightly just agreed to our remedies before we even issue the report, when we served them with a Section 79 notice. And it was easy to issue that report, and it will change the lives of those clinicians, and which will benefit the public, because a lot of them are working in rural areas. So that's my focus for now.
Public Protector, thank you very much for your time this evening, Advocate Mkhwebane. They're reflecting on the year that was, the work her office has been doing in this calendar year. They have issued 94 reports dealing with a whole range of issues, from service delivery to good governance, appointments of people, procurement of services, and so on. And today they held their 10th media briefing of the year, where she released 8 reports. Special thanks to her for her time. Now to this, an expert panel report has recommended that South Africa continues with the payment of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant until the basic income support grant is in place. We speak to the authors of that report, as well as the people who might have to implement that if indeed that goes ahead. That's coming up in a moment. Welcome back. An expert panel report has recommended that South Africa continues with the payment of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant until the basic income support grant is in place. The Social Development Department, in collaboration with the International Labour Organization, released the report today on basic income support for 18 to 60-year-olds to combat high poverty levels exacerbated by the pandemic.
The report says basic income support has become an urgent necessity. This is on the back of tough economic conditions and job losses made worse by the effects of COVID-19. The panel says instead of asking what is the cost of implementing basic income support grant, South Africa should rather ask what is the cost of not doing it. There are calls for the extension of the existing social relief for distress grant of 350 rand to act as a base to allow for an increase to higher levels over time.
It's no longer a question as to whether we need it. It's a question of when, how, and how creative can we be, and where can we get the money from. So the question about whether we need it or not is gone now.
A recent report by Stats SA said the percentage of households that have received at least one grant has increased to 52% in the past year. A beneficiary of the social relief for distress grant says although the 350 rand is not enough, it has made a big difference in her life.
This 350 Rand is really helping us, but it's really little because you can't even buy everything you need. I can only buy a few things. Like I said, I can only buy 10 kilograms of maize meal, 2 liters of cooking oil, 2 kilograms of soap and sugar, and the money gets finished. The truth is, it really helps, but it's too little.
Experts say the basic income support would reduce poverty immediately.
We regard the continuation of the COVID SRD as a critically necessary intervention until such time as an entry-level version of the BIS can be fully implemented. We also see continuous improvement over time as a central feature of the policy framework. While we accept that the widespread income poverty prevalent in South African society cannot be eliminated overnight, we nevertheless recognize the urgency of the situation and recommend that a policy framework be implemented that places the value of the BIS at the upper bound poverty level as soon as is sustainably possible.
The department says it believes the expansion of the social assistance framework is the key to inclusive economic participation, the reduction of inequalities, and is a real instrument that will lift a large number of South Africans out of poverty. Gloria Sefakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
To discuss the matters further, we're now joined by Dr. Gillard Isaacs, who is the director of the Institute for Economic Justice. We're also joined by Professor Alex van den Heever, who is the chair of Social Security Systems at WETS. He also chairs the expert panel that has come up with this report. We will also be joined by Brenda Sbeko, who is the Deputy Director General at the Department of Social Development. Professor van den Heever, let me start with you, if I may. Just very quickly, how did this initiative come about? Who, asked your panel to do what, exactly?
This was a discussion with the initiated by the International Labour Organization together with the Department of Social Development. Mm-hmm. And the key question really was to look at the technical feasibility, to look at both the necessity and an appraisal of the options for looking at income support for the currently unprotected group of people from the age of 18 to 59. And so essentially that is what we took a very deep look at from both from an economic evaluation perspective and as well as through various other technical analyses.
And how was the group put together? In other words, you took people from which disciplines or areas of work?
So because we were going to emphasize a degree of economic modeling, we looked at a computable general equilibrium model as one component of our technical analysis. So we had the person, Margaret Tiga, who would be the key person who drives that model and has a modeling team from Pretoria. She works as Dean of Economics at Pretoria University. And we also had, as a peer review process, we had Professor Jan van Heerden, who actually runs a different computable general equilibrium model to kind of also be part of the discussion. We also had an expert in microsimulation, the people who've developed SAMOD, which is a microsimulation model of the South African, basically of South African society. And we then had these two models work together, and she had a team behind her, but she was the panel member. The other people who participated were people who were from Seldru, who do work on poverty in South Africa, and were also working on microsimulation analysis and various technical analysis of poverty. Aside from them, we also had social security policy experts from the UK, and that would be and one or two others. So it's basically economists who were part of the panel, and sort of experts in microsimulation analysis. So there was a very big focus on looking at economic issues in the overall assessment. So we had Professor Michael Sachs, who was previously part of the National Treasury and in charge of the budget. Deputy Director General in charge of the budget, and he formed part of the process to look at the fiscal and financial issues associated with this kind of proposal.
Dr. Isaacs, I mean, your institute has been very active, especially over the past year in this space, where people were asking questions about affordability. You were among, the people who did, number crunching, but also, of course, spoke in great detail, over the necessity. For this. Just from the conversations that have led up to this report now being compiled and handed over to the Department of Social Development, what are the things that stand out for you?
Well, I think this is an important moment in that process which you outline. What we've seen is a public conversation. What we've seen is mention of this idea in numerous forums. And this is a significant instance of a government department putting its weight behind an expert report. And in this report, it notes that it is necessary, that it's urgent, it indicates that it's affordable, that it is viable, and that it's implementable. And that's a really significant step forward. It's a step forward which follows, as you note, this conversation, and that's focused on issues of whether it should be there. It's focused on issues of how it's financed and its affordabilities. It's focused on issues of debates on dependency. Alex earlier very articulately explained how the evidence does not indicate that these grants either create dependency, but he also emphasized that there isn't evidence that it undermines employment objectives. So those have both been elements of this public conversation. And then most recently, which the report gives further ideas for, is the conversation on pathways and on what it means to actually take a phased approach to see this implemented. Professor van den Jeffer was talking about, people like Michael Sachs, who know the ins and outs of Treasury, Treasury being a key player here, because often, the rest of the departments are really at the receiving end. Often, if Treasury says, oops, we can't, then it doesn't get done. Did you get any insights into what the thinking may be at Treasury, or how Treasury may actually, receive the proposals that are contained in the report? Well, I wouldn't necessarily extrapolate Michael's views for those of Treasury, but I do think we've had some indications in various ways. The first indication is that we're still talking about the need to extend the SRD grant. And presumably, if the talk is of its need to extend, that means that the approval for its extension as part of next year's budget has not been granted. If it was approved already, then we wouldn't need to speak about the need for its extension. So there's obviously some resistance which we've seen there. Previously, we saw an attempt by Treasury to advance the idea of a family grant, a grant for a family unit, with all of the complexities and difficulties of even trying to determine what a family is, instead of a individual basic income support, and that's been thrown out. So that once again seems to indicate, and they've subsequently said that they never intended that and backed that. But the presence of a countervailing alternative, which also would mean less people, and cheaper or at a lower cost, once again indicates from the outside some level of antagonism from Treasury. It remains to be seen whether this is tabled, whether it's approved in Cabinet, and whether it features in February's budget. But we're in full agreement with the expert panel that in these current circumstances, the extension and hopefully we would argue the improvement of the SRD grant is essential, and it's essential, as the expert panel argues, not just in and of itself, but as a means to put in place a pathway towards more permanent basic income support.
Brenda Sbeko, let's bring you in here. It's a pity we have to settle for the phone line due to the technical challenges you're experiencing. But I mean, from what the minister said earlier when the report was launched, it's no longer a question of whether we're doing it. It's a question of when, how, and how creative can we be. What exactly does that mean?
Thank you so much, Bio, and apologies that at least you can see a picture. The minister's assertion, basically, is that there is a need in the country, given the levels of poverty that we have, given the fact that we have gathered experience from the implementation of the SRD grant, for us to very seriously consider as a country whether, in fact, we should continue with income support. We have done quite a bit of research that shows the positive impacts we've achieved. And the report that we were launching today is really giving us even more evidence, taking into account international experience, taking into account our own experience in the country, taking into account various pieces of work that have been done to say that we do need, as a country, to move forward now with the implementation of some form of income support. Of course, Gilad is correct to say the decision has not yet been made in government. One of the things that we're doing, part of the reason we're doing this report, is really to provide the evidence of both the efficacy of such income support, but also to give guidance to government and some sort of evidence of the how to do it, based on the research that has been done, and also to show the different options of how this might be financed. As you are aware, part of the reasons for the hesitancy from government side in terms of this was, where is the fiscal space for this, and is it sustainable in the long term? And the research that has been done has tried to answer those questions. So we are expecting that, given the evidence that we've now gathered from the expert panel, and given the different options that they are presented to government, this will enable government to make a more concrete proposal in this decision, and also it is also making proposals about the how over the long term to implement this, where to start and the kind of directions that we need to be taking. So we think government is in a better position, based on the information that we've got, to make the decision in order to, because the question of how has sort of been answered, and the question of the approach has also been answered, given the options that have been presented to us. So based on that, Minister is saying we really now need to say, now that the questions that we didn't have answers to have now been, some answers have been given to us, then let's move forward and then decide on the options that have been put forward for us, which one should be implemented. But of course, this is not a decision of just the Minister of Social Development. It needs to be a government-wide decision. And that is why we must then take it to that step and get government as a whole to consider the advice that's being given to us by the experts.
Yeah, but apart from, or in addition to, I mean, the body of the research material that this report will no doubt add to, and the work that people like Dr. Isaacs at the Institute for Economic Justice have been doing, how much, in addition to like availing this information, how much mobilization have you done, within government, especially, those people you depend on for a decision? In other words, have you primed them? Have you been doing, work behind the scenes to sensitize them, around these issues, and the fact that you are collating information that will answer whatever questions that they may have?
This way even the implementation of the 350 grant was something that was a discussion within government as a whole. And we, as social development, of course, because we are the ones that need to implement, we have been engaging various government departments, including the National Treasury, to say that these are the arguments for implementing this and for going forward with it. So there is a lot of expectation from within government that the questions that have been answered in this research will help government to make the decision. So yes, there has been ongoing engagement in government. We have been talking with different departments. We even have task teams that have been looking at different permutations of how to do this. So this work that is done now adds to that conversation and provides more concrete evidence that we needed. So it's an ongoing discussion in Treasury between our minister and between the Minister of Finance and between the rest of Cabinet. So there has been consideration on an ongoing basis. This is why the Minister of Finance was then saying in the MTBPS that this area of work has not been finalized. So the conversation has been going on for quite a while. We just needed to give some concrete evidence in terms of how and where the sources of funding should be and where should we start, but also to also motivate from a constitutional perspective why it's important to do this, but also show that there is an interaction actually between income support and economic growth, and that these things should not be treated as competing, but that they need to actually be mutually supportive policy imperatives that government pursues. So this work begins to do that, to answer some of those issues that have been raised. And there has been quite a lot of discussion, yes, within government. This report has also been shared with other government departments in order for them to consider this.
Prof, I mean, what does this report answer in very specific terms, in ways perhaps that the question or questions, had never been answered before? In other words, if we're talking about where the money is going to come from, for example, or even the issue or question of necessity, what does this report do in ways that no one, had ever done before?
Well, first of all, it compiles all the discussions into a single report, which hasn't really been done before. Mm-hmm. And that includes, first and foremost, the nature of the problem, the context we're in. And so that particular analysis is quite extensive and deep. The second part is that we've compiled a literature review of the issues of the relationship between inequality and redistribution and economic growth as part of a general overview of the issues as other people have seen them. We've also compiled a literature review on the analytical requirements for addressing this kind of question. So we look methodologically, what kind of tools do you need? What type of models? What type of analysis can give us an idea and lower the risk of implementing this kind of reform if we take it forward. So that is there, and that informed then our technical analysis, in which we did look at the social and economic impacts of different scenarios moving forward. So we went beyond previous analysis in attempting to understand the actual economic dynamics and impacts. And as part of this analysis, we also attempted to look at the conservative positions. We could look at optimistic approaches, and we could look at a more conservative assessment and see what if we lowered the risk, the fiscal risk, for instance, with higher rates of tax increase to finance this. How would we manage if we increased the risk and reduced the tax revenue and deficit finance? So we kind of created a spectrum of impacts to understand the economic implications. So we got a good perspective of the parameters. And out of that, we also then have to form a reasonable judgment about what we think is possible going forward, which an expert panel like this, with its multidisciplinary capabilities, both in economics and social policy, could then look and say, well, this is what the model says, but we also understand from our expertise, this is what works and what doesn't. And we're able to build that into our findings and our recommendations. So I think that although some people might differ, perhaps, what we've created, therefore, is a point of departure for a detailed and deep discussion of these questions. And on questions such as dependency and so on, we also formulated clear positions from the evidence and documented them, where these are often raised in as general conventional wisdoms rather than analytical or empirical evaluations. So we document them and make the evidence absolutely clear on whether or not such social support actually results in dependency or actually has an enabling effect on society. So that evidence is also compiled to kill that dragon as well, because that evidence has been compiled now over the last 20 years since the Taylor Committee of Inquiry, and we can bring it in and make it very clear. So we hope that end to end in this report, quite a lot of the questions that people would have had around the feasibility of such a reform, that this is now available to kind of go through and see whether or not those questions are properly addressed. And it is important to note that quite a lot of the people involved, including myself, have originally worked in Treasury as well. We know Treasury, we know government very, very well, and we understand the kind of questions that governments need to ask in order to do this kind of thing, and we made sure that that could be properly analysed within a report such as this.
Dr. Isaacs, from where you sit, just very quickly, was the problem, or up until now, has the big problem been lack of knowledge or not enough knowledge, information, or was it perhaps people's predisposition and attitudes?
I think those two things can sometimes be interrelated, in the sense that people's negative attitudes might be based on a lack of knowledge and information. I think what also plays a part is that, and the report has done this very well, is that people need to be able to imagine something. How is a policy going to be implemented? How is it rolled out? And so on. And the report takes the kind of pathways approach, where in this immediate phase, there's the SRD grant, which the report says must be institutionalized or stabilized. After that, the report speaks about a entry-level basic income support at the food poverty line of 595 Rand, with a means test so that only those earning under 4,600 access that. And then it refers to a gradual increase, both in who is eligible, allowing the pool of eligible individuals to increase, and an increase in the amount of up to the upper bound poverty line of 1,300. Now, that might not be the eventual pathway. Us and others have put forward various other iterations which overlap substantially. But what that allows us to do is have a conversation in a public which is rooted in a proposal which we can see a viable path towards implementing. And once we have the evidence, as Alex has laid out, and that that's really put forward in a detailed and a systematic way, and then we'd be able to have a conversation about these viable pathways, then it allows us to move beyond what's there theoretically to what can actually be done in practice. And lastly, I think an important rider that the report makes about the notion of a pathway is that it's not a vague sort of idea which gives like a easy exit that government can say, okay, we've got a pathway and we'll get there like eventually. It calls for it to be explicit and unambiguous and clear.
Okay. Brenda, very quickly, 20 seconds literally. What is the status of this report and what happens next?
Thanks, Vio. From government side, we are now taking the report into the government process for consideration as part of the policy making and the decision making to inform how to implement and how to move forward for 2022-23, given that the the SRD 350 is meant to expire on that date. So this now goes into the government process for decision making. It informs the decision making of government around what to do in 2022-23 about income support for the age group that is excluded currently.
Okay, that's
and then in addition to that, of course, there's going to be further consultations about the broader social security system that needs to be, that within which this needs to be located. But the key thing now is there is a need to make a decision for March 2022 what's going to happen, and this report and the content of it is going to then be considered in government to inform that decision. Thanks.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Special thanks to our guest, Brenda Sibeko, who is the Deputy Director General with the Department of Social Development. Dr. Gillard Isaacs is a Director at the Institute for Economic Justice, and Professor Alex van der Jefer is the Chair of Social Security Systems at VETS, and he chairs the expert panel that produced the report we are talking about. Now, after the break, we bring you the latest COVID numbers, but also what the president has to say about the video that's making the rounds on social media about showing him dancing without a mask. There are 13,992 new positive COVID cases that have been reported in the last 24 hours and 11 related deaths. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases says they are working through a backlog of data after the National Health Laboratory experienced challenges with its systems after an upgrade. The NICD says the positivity rate currently stands at 31%. Now, this is 6 times higher than the rate at which the spread of the virus is considered to be under control. The rapid spread of the virus during the 4th wave is driven by the highly infectious Omicron variant. Gauteng accounts for almost half the new cases reported, followed by KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape. The NICD says the reporting on coronavirus statistics may include retrospective cases as systems return to functionality. Now, Minister in the Presidency, Mondli Gungubele, says President Cyril Ramaphosa regrets the moment he was filmed dancing without a mask on. The president was on a 7-day tour of West Africa. Ramaphosa is currently in isolation in Cape Town after testing positive for COVID-19. Gungubele says Ramaphosa is in good health.
It's a regrettable moment. That's the point I can make. But I think we should take it to the context that I know the president's seriousness about COVID. I know the sacrifice he has made, how he has stuck to that as long as I've worked with him. But it is an unfortunate moment which I think the president accepts the criticism.
Yeah. Will he apologize for it?
And when I say it's a regrettable moment, I thought that should be fine.
Okay.
But you will leave the president at a time when he's actually questioning about it. But I know very well that the president regrets that moment.
Minister in the Presidency, Mondli Gungubele, speaking earlier to our sister show, Full View. And that's our show for this evening. Do join us again tomorrow, 8 p.m. sharp. Good night.